Hi everyone, we're going to get started now.
Great. Welcome everyone. My name is Aaron Dunn, the Vice President of Marketing and Strategy for Percussion Software. I wanted to thank everyone for joining today, our webinar on understanding mobile and responsive web design. Not surprisingly, we've got a very large turnout today. This is a topic that I think everyone is grappling with, trying to understand how they should approach mobile and best practices for doing so. We're really excited to get started, and again, thank you for joining. Scott is going to speak for about 40 minutes, and then we'll, of course, take questions at the end, answer some of your questions at the end. Feel free to use the questions tool to submit your question. Also, we will be posting a replay of the webinar as well as the slides to percussion.com later today, first thing tomorrow morning, so we will make these available. For a quick word on Percussion, Percussion is a web content management and content marketing software product. Certainly we've been working with a number of different companies over the years, over the last 12 years of doing this. Certainly some names you've heard of and a few others that you may not have. Percussion is, works across all sectors and across a number of different size companies. And really our goal is to help you with a highly usable software product, help you accelerate your content marketing and get started with driving more content online, getting it up there faster, and to reach more people. You can learn more about our products at www.percussion.com, and of course, follow us on Twitter @Percussion. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Scott. Scott Noonan is the CTO of Boston Interactive. They are a leading web design agency here in Boston. Scott, as you'd expect, works to keep the agency and their clients current on everything that is new. Not surprisingly, mobile is right in his wheelhouse then. So with that, let me turn it over to you, Scott. Take it away.
Thanks very much, Aaron, and thank you everyone for coming out today for this webinar. So the topic on the table today is, of course, responsive design, and as Aaron mentioned, this is a topic that's really on the minds of a lot of folks nowadays, and it's a very important topic. And with that, I think there's a few things we'd like to address today around that, and one is we'd like to really talk about what responsive design really is and give it an overview of what it's about and what it entails. Secondly, whether or not it's a viable solution for your particular project. And then finally, if you believe that it is, then really how you go about executing on a responsive project. A couple of quick words just about who I am to put some context around this voice that you're hearing. As Aaron said, my name is Scott Noonan, and I've been the Chief Technology Officer at Boston Interactive since 2001. In that time, I've participated in approximately 400 different web projects at BI, and really found web to be quite a passion for me. I have 30-plus years of software development, and the last 15 or so years have been spent in the web and the content management space. So as you can imagine, having been around sort of since the beginning of the web space and the internet space, we've seen had the privilege of seeing a lot of changes that have taken place and seeing a lot of technology that has come along, and one of the wonderful things is that seems to continue on. So responsive design, let's start by talking a little bit about what that is. In 2010, a couple of years ago, a Boston gentleman by the name of Ethan Marcotte published an article in A List Apart coining this term responsive design. And among other things in the article, Ethan discussed a couple of techniques that really were essential in defining what responsive design was. And those two techniques were flexible grid and then the concept of using what are called media queries. Now the flexible grid is not really a new idea. This is the idea behind it is designing a website that basically responds or changes the content as your screen size changes. It's often referred to as adaptive design, and we basically build the site in a flexible manner so that as the screen either grows or contracts, the content would flow along with that. This really came about early on in the web phase when we had smaller monitors and we were typically using 800 by 600 screen resolutions. And then as these monitors got larger and resolutions got higher, we really wanted to have a way to fill up that white space and actually expand our sites. So initially, the flexible grid was more on making our sites grow with content as opposed to shrink. And as you can see, as we bring up the example here, as this site sort of contracts and grows, the content simply adjusts to it accordingly and fills up our space. As I said, this is not a new concept. This has been around for a little bit of time, but this is one of the key points in defining what responsive design really was all about. The second thing that Ethan spoke of was this concept of media queries. Without getting too technical, the idea of media queries really came about in the CSS3 specification. And basically what it allowed us to do was it allowed us to determine the viewport size dynamically. And when we talk about the viewport, we're talking about essentially the screen size of the device, whether that's the browser window or your phone or your tablet. And with that information, we're able to use this and essentially, using CSS, now relay out and redesign certain portions of our page. These two things together are really powerful concepts because it allowed us to not only flow and adapt content to our screen, it also allowed us to actually make changes to how our content is displayed. So we see a page like this on a desktop device, for example, and then we take a look at it on the tablet device, and as you can see, it's the same content, it's the same page, but we simply, using some CSS, have been able to relay out some of the items on this page to make it appropriate for that size device. If we go down to the phone size, we see the same thing. So essentially, as we look at these three examples together, we really have the same site, the same page, the same content. We've just redistributed how that content is being displayed on the different devices based on the size of their viewport, not based on the device itself. This is more than just relaying out or reflowing content because we can actually do things in CSS, for example, like changing font sizes, changing line heights, changing links into buttons, modifying how we display certain portions of the site, not just reflowing it. So, we have to ask ourselves, what does this really mean? Well, prior to having responsive design at our beck and call, we used to use what was called device detection to determine the different types of devices that were accessing our website. So basically, someone would access our website. We determine if they're on an iPad, an iPhone, an Android device, a desktop, whatever that may be. And essentially, we would create separate versions of the website based on that device. I'm sure we're all pretty familiar with the concept of the M.dot site. So essentially what we do is create these different versions of our site, and as you can imagine, this became more complex as more and more devices hit the scene. We now had separate websites for all these different devices, which meant having to manage separate code bases. We had to now start thinking about what these other code bases, keeping the content fresh in all three of them. It really became very difficult to maintain consistency for our users, and really became difficult to keep up with all the new devices. Every time a new device came out, we can't just build a new website wrapped around the size of that device. This is where responsive really became a very powerful tool for us because we can now build a website that will essentially just respond to the viewport of the device on which it's being viewed. This, essentially what we're looking at is the same site responds to any device. So we're not worried about different versions of the site, who's viewing it, how they're viewing it. One site fits all of these different devices. Now, for a lot of folks, unfortunately, this is where the conversation tends to end. We think of responsive design as just being something that responds and modifies itself to our device. It really goes much deeper than this, and that's really what we want to try to understand and talk about today. And a couple of things we really want to consider about responsive design is what does it really do for us? Why we should consider it, and whether or not we think it's a real viable option for our particular web project. So first off, what is responsive design really about? Well, it's really about allowing our users to easily access and digest our content, regardless of device. We don't want to be limiting how things are being given to our users just because of the device they happen to be on. It's not just about layout. It's really about other considerations like bandwidth, for example. When you're on a mobile phone, are there some bandwidth considerations we really have to have here? A lot of our sites tend to be or tended to be very, very heavy and have a lot of high-level graphical options, a lot of JavaScript calls, things that really can start to slow sites down and put a lot of stress on a site loading on a mobile device. And these are some of the considerations that we want to have when we're talking about responsive design, because ultimately our end goal is to make our website really usable for everybody, regardless of the device they happen to be coming in on. It's about creating a user experience that's complete and satisfying for any user on any device. This is a very important concept, one that really is, I think, bears a couple of minutes to talk about. Well, what I mean by this is, in the past, when we had our mobile-only sites, it was very common for us to have a truncated version of the site, less content, not the whole thing. We sort of made the assumption that users were looking for certain pieces of content, and that's what we're going to give them. I'm sure a lot of you are like me in that once I get out of the office, quite frankly, probably 95% of my web browsing occurs on my phone or on my tablet outside of the office. And in particular, from an email perspective, I probably do all of my email checking on my phone. I don't log into any other desktop devices when I get home or out of the office. And it's quite common, for example, for someone to send me a link to some content that they need me to read or to review or they just want to share with me. And from a user experience perspective, I can't tell you how many times I get a link sent to me via email. I click on that link, and one of two things usually happens. Either, number one, I'm brought to a desktop-optimized website, which becomes very, very difficult for me to really view properly on my phone. I'm constantly pinching and zooming and moving things around to read it. Or worse yet, I actually come to an MDOT site or a mobile-only site, and that content's not even available to me. That content has been deemed as not necessary for mobile. And as you can imagine, that becomes a very frustrating experience. Now I've got to wait until I get in front of a computer somewhere or save the email and remember to take a look at it when I get in the office the next day. And this, quite frankly, in today's environment is just not a good user experience. Another common example is search. I mean, I think we all are pretty comfortable using our devices nowadays. Search is quite easy. It's very easy for me to go on Google or Bing or any other search engine on my phone and quickly conduct a search. And very similarly, it's very common for me to come up with some links that I just can't navigate to in an effective manner on my phone. I had this happen actually quite recently when I was up in Vermont on vacation with my family, simply trying to find a restaurant to have dinner. And I just wanted to find some restaurants, check some menus out, and quite honestly, between the bandwidth considerations of where I was and the lack of real mobile support through these websites, it became very frustrating for me just to find a simple menu somewhere. And quite honestly, I just ended up ditching the search and picking a restaurant at random. So, creating a user experience that's complete on any device is a very important part of what responsive design is. Being ready for the future, what we call future-ready, future-friendly, and that's a big part of responsive design. Again, that we're not designing for specific devices. We're designing for anything that may come across in the future. Things like the iPhone 5 recently coming out with a larger viewport and a larger display. We didn't have to worry if our responsive site, we knew it would adapt easily to it. We didn't have to worry about creating a new site now for the larger screen size. The popularity of devices like Kindle and Nook, which is sort of that mid-sized tablet, those are becoming huge, and they're cropping up every single day. And really, it's not just about mobile. We can't only consider mobile. We have to think about other devices as well, like Apple TV and Google TV. And an interesting stat I heard recently, which I found quite interesting, was that 1 in 4 American teens right now use their games console as their primary way to navigate the web. So, people are using items other than just mobile devices and desktops. So being future-friendly really allows us to be ready for any device that may come out in the future. Responsive design is also part of our overall content delivery strategy. At the end of the day, our goal with our web properties is really to be able to deliver appropriate content to our users. And responsive design is just one strategy that we can implement to actually accomplish that goal. And very importantly, it's about being able to manage one code base and one code repository. An interesting article in TechCrunch recently was interviewing some folks at Facebook, and Facebook claims that on any given day, approximately 7,000 different devices access Facebook. It was a pretty staggering number when I read it. I'm not sure I believe 100% that number exists, but certainly we know the number is high, and it's very easily to find 300 or 400 legitimate devices that are in use out there today. And being able to manage one code base that can service all of those is extremely important. It's just not possible to have a different site for every type of device that may come out in the future. Really, in the end, responsive design is about your content and it's about your user's experience. And if you take nothing else from this webinar, take this piece, because that's really what it's about. It's not just about relaying out and moving things around on your site. Those are all some great technical, quote-unquote, tricks that we can do. It's really about delivering good content to your users in a digestible way that gives them what they're looking for. Okay, so we've talked about what responsive design is about. Now, why should we care? Well, a quote that I've always liked was one from Paul Graham, who's a venture capitalist, who basically said, unlike winning an Olympic gold medal, where the problem is well-defined, building a successful company is actually more like a science, where you need to follow the trail wherever it leads. Nothing could be more appropriate than this in terms of the digital space and the interactive space. The writing is on the wall. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and bore you with a lot of stats. We've all heard them. We've seen them. We've read about them, about the increase in mobile usage, about how it's projected in 2013 that mobile web browsing will surpass desktop browsing. We've heard all those things, but really you don't need to do much more than just look around your environment on any given day. We see these devices, different devices everywhere. I recently, I tend to ride the train a lot in town, going from place to place, and I recently did a little informal survey. I was sitting in the subway car, and I just happened to look around, and the maybe 20 people or so that were around me, I was amazed at the number of people that were spending their time on the train consuming content in one capacity or another on their mobile devices. And when I really took a look around and to see what devices people were using, there was quite a variety. I mean, a couple of Kindles, there was a Nook, there were several iPads, a couple of iPhones, some Android devices. There's still even a BlackBerry kicking around. So if we just look in our everyday lives, we can certainly see that this stuff is happening everywhere, and that audience is only growing. And if we don't follow that trail and we don't really look toward that, I think we're only destined to fail on our web projects. A nice example I like to look toward in terms of following the trail versus not is sort of the Blockbuster versus Netflix story that I'm sure we're all pretty familiar with. In the early days of the web, really Blockbuster was sort of the de facto video rental service company in the country. We all knew who they were. They had a huge brick and mortar presence, quite a popular business model. And in the early days of the web, they really didn't come quickly to adopt the idea of the internet. Whereas the startup company Netflix came along and took that same business model and threw it online. I mean, I think we're all familiar with that. We've all probably used it in one capacity or another. And they really just sort of leapfrogged right over Blockbuster in that video rental or CD rentals or DVD rental space. And unfortunately for Blockbuster, they kind of made the same mistake twice. They missed the boat in the beginning, but even when they finally realized the viability of the web and then put all the resources towards allowing for the rentals of DVDs online, Netflix was already investing money in investigating streaming technology, even before it was really viable. I can remember thinking when Netflix first talked about streaming, it's just not possible right now. Bandwidth isn't good enough. It's just not going to be a good experience for the user. But knowing it was coming, they put a lot of time and money into that. So once again, when Blockbuster sort of caught up to them, they leapfrogged them again with video demand, basically on demand. Now, Netflix has had its share of problems recently, but one certainly can't overlook the fact that they had a lot more foresight than Blockbuster did in terms of the technology moving forward. Another great example I like to point to is PayPal, and only because we're also familiar with PayPal, and we sort of view PayPal today as one of the de facto online payment gateways for millions of individuals and companies around the world. But many of you may or may not know that PayPal actually started simply as a cryptography company. They weren't really involved in the merchant space at that time. They were very smart as well. When PDAs became popular, for those of you who remember PDAs, when those became popular, PayPal really moved past cryptography and morphed into a means to transmit money from one PDA to another. They became a sort of a transmission, financial transmission process. And then as the web really became explosive, they really found their sweet spot in becoming an online payment gateway. So just another example of a company who started off with one set of thoughts and one business model and really kept morphing and changing itself to adapt to the technical environment around them. For those of you who remember these companies that we're looking at right now, Xerox, Kodak, and NCR, I don't think we have to look any further than these. These were really three giants in their day. And those of you who were around during the days of them being a giant remember what fantastic companies they were. But really, each one of these is now a shell of their former selves, mostly due to their inability to react to a changing market. Obviously there are other things that are involved in that, but these are some of the primary reasons why these companies aren't what they used to be. So we have to ask ourselves the next question, is responsive the right choice for me? And I think this is a very important question to ask because it's not always going to be the right solution for you, and I think you need to make a very informed decision as to whether or not it works for you or not. Generally speaking, when I look at a particular project to determine if responsive is the right choice, I look at two things. The first is the audience. And I think this is probably one of the more important pieces to look at because I think it's often misunderstood. We hear a lot, we tend to look at our analytics and use our analytics for a variety of different reasons, and one of them is to try to understand who our audience is and what they're doing with our website. And a common, what I'm going to call myth that I tend to hear is that, people look at their analytics and say, well, my analytics right now don't really show a lot of mobile traffic to my site. I'm seeing maybe 1 or 2%, but that's really it. So I don't really need to consider mobile at this time. It's not that important right now. And my argument to that is it because the mobile users aren't coming to your site, or is it because mobile users can't come to your site? Is it because the experience is so poor that they just don't bother and they leave? I know, quite frankly, if I go to a site on my phone and it's not easily digestible and easy for me to navigate, I just don't go any further. I'll come back another time, and I just won't go visit that site again. I'll go look at it on my desktop. And we can bear this with some of the analytics that we've done for pre- and post-responsive projects that we've worked on, where we've seen the number of mobile users jump dramatically after a responsive site has been launched. And it didn't jump, in my opinion, because people suddenly knew it was responsive and could go there on their phones. It jumped because people were coming to the site, always coming on their mobile devices, but now they were continuing to come. They were coming back again. They realized they now didn't need to wait until they got in front of a desktop in order to view these sites properly. So I think that's one place we have to be very careful with how we analyze that traffic. Another common myth that I hear a lot is that people on their mobile devices don't want to consume full content. And I think this is a case where we have to be very careful that we don't confuse context with content. Just because our user is on mobile doesn't mean they're not looking for the full experience. In the early days of mobile, we used to have this sort of idea in our mind that people really only surf the web on their phone when they were looking for something really quick, like a contact number or a quick an address. And they usually only did it when they were trying to kill a little bit of time. They might be sitting in an airport or waiting in line somewhere, but they really weren't into consuming full content on their phones. And I just don't, I think that's a dangerous approach to take if we try to think of cutting down our content or truncating our content because someone's on a phone. A good example I like to use around that is several years ago, I have a fairly long commute into work every day, usually an hour to an hour and a half, and I thought it really would be a better use of my time to do something productive while I was in my car. So I subscribed to what's called the books on tape. Certainly not on tape. It was on these days it was on CD, but I subscribed to a books on tape service. I thought it would be great. I can catch up on some reading, do some things, read about some things, or hear about some things I'm really interested in. And I was pretty excited about it, so I signed up for the service, and I got my first CD in the mail, and popped it in on my way to work one day. And to my surprise, by the time I got to work, I was already done with the first book. And what I didn't realize at the time, which I'm sure many of you do realize, and if you don't, the catch here is that these are all shortened versions of the books. They're not full versions of the book on CD. So basically, the books on tape business model assumed that because I was listening, because I was in my car and traveling, that I really didn't want the full content. I only wanted partial content. And quite honestly, I was pretty disappointed and pretty upset about it and canceled my service right away because I wasn't interested in partial content. I wanted all of it. And I think we're seeing more and more of that with people today on their mobile devices. They're not satisfied with partial content. And there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to give it to them. As I mentioned earlier, I mean, outside the office, I do 90% of my browsing either on my phone or on my tablet. I never open up my laptop. I don't even have a desktop in my house anymore. Everything I do is done via mobile. So I'm expecting to get that full content, and if I don't, I feel very dissatisfied. We also have to recognize that today is what I call power user, the up-and-coming market who are trying to market our goods and services to. These are all folks that were born in the digital age, so they're used to this. My daughter has a laptop, an iPad, and an iPhone, and quite frankly, she does everything on her iPhone. She watches full-length movies, she watches television shows, she does her shopping, all on her iPhone. I never see her with that laptop ever, and only occasionally do I see her with her iPad. So we really need to make sure that we understand that and that we think about our audience and try not to get past some of those older notions. Another one I hear a lot of is that people don't want to do complex things over their phone. They just want to get, again, quick information and get out. A real telling stat around that is from eBay. And if you haven't heard this one, it was pretty interesting. 2,500 cars a day on average are sold on eBay using a mobile device. And quite frankly, if buying a car is not a complex task, I'm not quite sure what is. I'm very comfortable. I book hotels online on my phone. I'll shop. I do advanced searches. I'm very comfortable using my mobile device, and more people are for complex tasks. So I think we need to throw that myth away as well. The second thing I really consider when deciding if responsive is the right choice is really understanding your content. And this is where we have to take a look at our site and decide if our site is really a good responsive candidate. And when I think about that, I really think about three different types. I think about sites with really, really rich content. And when I say rich content, I don't mean big, long articles. I mean a lot of disparate content or related content that's going on the site or on the page. Amazon's a good example. We've all been there, I'm sure. You have a plethora of information that's showing up on any given page. You're looking at product information. You've got advertisement. You've got people who bought this also might like. You've got reviews. You've got product comparisons. We can compare 4 or 5 products side by side. This can become a bit of a challenge to take a layout like this and in a traditional responsive fashion adapt it or to adapt it to a responsive site using sort of traditional techniques. You may find that if your site's content is a little bit too rich, it might not be the right candidate. Similar to that are sites that offer really complex functionality. And what I mean by that, a good example of this are a lot of electronic sites that you go to nowadays have really rich, deep, faceted search functionality where I can search on models, prices, sizes, a lot of different things I can sort of facet my way through. And this can be sometimes challenging to do in a responsive fashion and maintain a good user experience. Oftentimes you might actually, from a mobile perspective, trim down how the searches are being done or change how the searches are being done. And it's really the only viable way to give that user a proper experience. I'm not saying it's impossible to do, but it's certainly something that you need to consider very carefully and be very conscientious in deciding if your site will respond nicely given its complex functionality. The third type of site that we have to look at in determining if it's the right choice for you are sites with what I call a non-adaptable design. If the design of your site is such that it's just really difficult to modify into being responsive, it's just not the right candidate. The one that we're showing here on the screen now is a site that was built not too long ago by Google called The Life of an Email. And as you can see, it's a very visual, kind of a fun, interactive piece. You can click things along the way and find out what happens to an email as it's going along. And as you can imagine, trying to take something visual like this and converting it into something responsive for a phone, really it just loses its purpose, it loses its impact. So if the purpose of your site is something along these lines and something that needs to be visual like this, then converting it into responsive just may not be the right choice for you. So at this point, if you've made the decision that responsive is the right choice, in fact, for you, the big question is really how do I go about doing it? I think one of the first questions that people tend to ask themselves are, should I start over and start from scratch, or should I try to retrofit my current site? It can be tough because, a lot of times it's very difficult. You've just been through a web project, you've just launched your new site, you're happy with everything that's on there, and now to go back in and sort of redo it all over again from scratch can be fairly daunting, and for a variety of reasons just may not be viable. Retrofitting can certainly be done. We've done many of them ourselves. Depending on your site, it can sometimes be a very painful process, sometimes can be somewhat simple. It's tricky because what you're doing is you're taking something that's already there, and now you're trying to achieve some different goals with it. Sometimes where it gets a little bit challenging is where if you have a lot of old legacy HTML, for example, a lot of table structures, things of that nature, it's just going to be very difficult to retrofit it. You're probably going to have to rewrite your code anyway, so it might be a good time to take advantage of the opportunity and decide if you can do some other things to better your site in terms of user experience and in terms of content. Because remember, we have to consider that since responsive design is not just about layout, it's really about content user experience, we have to decide if retrofitting is even a good choice. Because if we're going to invest a lot of time and money into retrofitting our site, but really our user experience and our content is not really geared towards all users and all devices, it might just be a waste of our time. So I oftentimes like to think it's a good chance to step back, analyze what you've got on there right now, take a good look at your content, take a good look at your user experience, take a look at your quick paths and your strategies and your goals. And if you're satisfied with all those and the design that you currently have in place is easily modified to become responsive, then a retrofit can certainly happen and could work for you. The next step to take, and quite frankly, in my opinion, probably the most important is analyzing your content. We said that in the beginning, that really any web project is, at the end of the day, it's about your content. It would be really hard for me. I like to use an analogy where if you said to me one day, look, I'd really love for you to build me a brand new kitchen. And I go off and I start meeting with the contractors, and I meet with the architects and everyone, the plumbers, the electricians, and I go ahead and build you this kitchen. And I build you a really nice, 12-foot by 12-foot kitchen with a nice little porch off the back and a little table that seats 4 people, and use all the top-notch best appliances and build that kitchen for you. And then suddenly you come in and you tell me that, well, wait a second, I'm a gourmet chef. I have a 6-burner Viking stove. I commonly entertain 15 or 20 people at any given time. I basically built something without considering, at the end of the day, the context and the content for what you're going to be delivering at the end of it all. So content is a real big, important part of the responsive project. What does your content look like? What types of content do you have? How is it navigated? How is it found? How do people search on it? What are there digital assets that go along with it? Are there visual assets that go along with it? I mean, if someone asked me what comprises of an event, I could probably give you 10 different renditions of an event. An event can be something as simple as a date, a title, and some brief text. It could be as much as a date, a title, biographies of the presenters, location, agendas, multiple meeting rooms, registrations. It can be a lot of different things. So it's very important, I think, for us to really analyze our content carefully, because in order to come up with a responsive design to support that content, we really need to understand it. One of the things we have to consider is not just about the words that you're using when we talk about content, it's about the visual aspects that might go along with it as well. All of these pieces are very important. I mean, in a lot of cases, the first and second generation CMSs made us a little bit sloppy with our content, because we thought about, the goal was to separate presentation from content. And so we created these systems that were very, very flexible, allowed people to put in content at will, put it anywhere, and do whatever they want with it. And it's really okay to go back and put some rules around your content now, and really structure your content and decide what's the best way to deliver the right amount of content to the right amount of people, not just for mobile, but for desktop as well. So once you've done that, I like to start with the foundation. When I say start with the foundation from a design perspective, I really mean sort of the common pieces of your site. When we think of a typical website, we think of things like the header, main navigation, footer, sort of the general layout, and what we're going to do with those pieces in the layout. And before I get too deep into actually building the more finer points of the site, I really like to make sure we take a lot of time in building that foundation, making decisions in terms of what's going to happen with certain pieces of the site when the viewport changes. What should we do with that? If we have a top navigation on our site, what should we do with it as it gets too small, as the viewport becomes too small to support it? Are we going to go to a button with a drop-down navigation? Are we going to go to a navigation that flies in off the side? Are we going to move our links to the bottom of the content? What are we going to do? And if we start with the foundation and make those decisions early on, it's going to make it a lot easier when we start to get into the nitty-gritty of our site and start to work inside the inner pieces. You may have heard the term in the past, pattern libraries, and these are basically taking different pieces of your site, say like the top navigation, the side navigation, how I'm going to deal with callouts, taking those individual pieces and really coming up with a strategy for how those pieces will respond given different viewport sizes. If you go onto Google and do a search on pattern libraries, you'll find a plethora of information and a lot of really great examples of how other people have solved problems similar to yours. A gentleman by the name of Brad Frost has a really great sort of collection of these things. If you just Google Brad Frost, what is responsive, or this is responsive, you'll find a great site where you can find all kinds of information and all kinds of examples of how people have dealt with different problems and how to display those problems in a responsive environment. The next step in the process, and really what I encourage you to do, is to get involved. This is not a technology problem. This is a problem, whether you're project manager, whether you're the marketing person who's sort of driving the project, whether you're the designer, whether you're the UX person, be involved all the way through the project. All too often people sort of look at this as a technical issue, sort of toss it over the wall and say, here's my stuff, now make it responsive. You need to be involved in these decisions because this is your user experience and your content. And a lot of choices have to be made along the way. As we start to look at the site and we look at how the site responds to different size viewports, there are conversations that need to be had. How should we do this and how should we display that and how should we represent this? And you want to be involved in those. If you're not really, at the end of the day, you really only have yourself to blame if you're dissatisfied. I don't think you'd want me to come in and redecorate your house without your involvement. I'm going to make my decisions, make my choices. I'm not going to necessarily have your context or your long-term goals in mind. You need to be a part of that process with me. The final step in the process, and sometimes the most daunting for people, is testing. Testing, really, we have to make sure we test across as many devices as possible. This can be tricky. We can't all afford to go out and buy 400 different devices, but there are a lot of creative ways you can go about testing. There's some great simulators out there that will get you a good part of the way there and give you some general idea. I believe Firefox has a plug-in. If you hit Control-Shift-M, M is in mobile, it brings up a plugin that lets you change viewport sizes and gives you a general idea of how things will respond. We here at the office, in the early days, we just used any device we could find. We used family members, friends, other colleagues. Then we started buying devices online, quite frankly, that just were Wi-Fi enabled, and we would use them in our office. It wasn't uncommon to see me also head down to the local Verizon store or T-Mobile store and basically just start surfing the web on phones that were there. We put a project up, put it online so it could be viewed, and I'd head on down to the store and check it out on all these different devices. So you can be creative, but do your testing because you want to make sure everything is going to work the way you expect it to. So what have we learned here? Well, we've learned that responsive is not the only answer. Analyze carefully, decide if it's the right project for you. In many cases it is, but just because it's the latest and greatest way of doing things, don't assume that every project needs to be responsive. It's not simply resizing your website. Remember, it's about your user experience and it's about your site adapting to different types of devices, not just by a resize perspective, but also how you might lay out certain portions of your site. Responsive is not just a mobile strategy. Responsive is about all devices, mobile or not. And it's something that we really need to keep in mind, particularly as more and more people are going towards things like game consoles and web-enabled television. Responsive is part of your overall content delivery strategy. This is really probably one of the most important things to remember. Remember, your content ultimately is your secret sauce. You need to be able to effectively get that content out to any user in any environment. Today we're talking about web, but your content can go out in a number of different ways. It can go out via RSS. It can be consumed via through API, via other applications. It can be consumed on mobile applications. It can be shared across a number of different areas. So really thinking about our content and our overall content delivery strategy, responsive is just a part of that. It is device agnostic, and I know this seems very obvious, but I can tell you I've been involved in a lot of responsive projects, and it's very hard to get people outside of the thinking of iPhone, iPad, desktop. Even when we're talking responsive, I hear all the time, okay, what will it do when we get to an iPhone? What will we do when it gets to an iPad? It's not about those three devices. It's about any device. And just setting up sort of 3 different versions of our site can be very dangerous. The rule of thumb for me is I'm changing viewport sizes. When the content gets ugly, make a decision and do something with it. That could be at any size. It may not be at the iPad size. It may be somewhere in between. So remember that it's not just about those 3 devices. And with that, it's about being future friendly. We're trying to design a site that will work across any device, regardless of what it happens to be. In the end, it's about content and it's about your user experience. That's really the case with any web project, and it's no different in responsive. And that's the thing I'd really like to make sure you take away today. Consider those 2 things when you're doing your project, and that will steer you in the right direction. So with that, I'd like to open it up to any questions that anyone may have.
That's great, Scott. Thanks for taking us through this. It was really interesting. A lot of interesting insight, and we've been tweeting some of that out as we've gone here. But I think the first most important question that a lot of us are having, particularly around the lunch hour, is you mentioned that you chose a restaurant at random. I got to know, was it any good?
I did, yep. The first one I came to.
Good deal?
It was very frustrating for me, trying to find something that would actually give. All I wanted to do was find a menu somewhere, and believe it or not, that became a 15-minute problem for me, and it was just too long. I became frustrated and decided to go elsewhere.
Yeah, knowing your audience is important. I think certainly for restaurants and other folks like that. Even for B2B companies, understanding how people might be using mobile is an important first start. So we've had some great questions. We'll see if we can't fire through them here and really keep us on track here. So first question comes, kind of came up in the beginning here when you were talking about how to get started. And the question, I'll read it here, comes from Judy. What media query sizes do you recommend to trigger on? And then, of course, how do you make sure that images are included in all content?
That's a fantastic question. And that's one that comes up quite a bit in terms of media queries. And my answer to that is there are none. There are no predetermined media query sizes that we should be looking for. Basically, it's as you're resizing the viewport, when things start to become uncomfortable and things don't work, put in a breakpoint. Make a decision as to how you want the problem area to resolve, and go from there. It's not uncommon in a lot of sites that we've done in the past to have